My mission is to reframe what therapy should look like. I think it's a disservice that we are thinking that therapy is you're going and you're talking about the same thing every session, or the issue of the week. You don't have structure to the session. It's not evidence based, right?
Mm.
Insurance companies are getting smarter, and they're asking for therapists and social workers to now provide evidence that their therapy is working. I think therapy should be a lot less talking and a lot more doing.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Eyes Wide Open. Our guest today is Madina Alam. Madina is a licensed mental health therapist with expertise in anxiety disorders and OCD. She was also a former cast member of The Bachelor, season 28. She's a model, fitness enthusiast, certified yoga instructor, and a successful public speaker who has also participated in several bodybuilding competitions. You are also hosting an upcoming mental health event in Charlotte, North Carolina. That link to register, check it out, registers below. That was a long intro, but you do a lot of things.
I do, but you made me sound way more impressive than I am.
Oh my God, I think that's the first one I had to breathe in between. Take a breath in between.
Yeah, I am kind of all over the place. So
That's good though. Well, this is my first question I ask everyone, and I'm curious because I think we'll touch a lot of these things. But what did you want to be when you were a young kid? And then how did that change growing up to lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because a lot of times people ask me why I became a therapist, and I was like, I always say I actually wanted to be a judge my whole life. A judge or a
This is
lawyer.
kind of the opposite because you're not allowed to judge or you're not supposed to judge or anything.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
It's
But
like
yeah,
there's all the biases you have to recognize and address and to be culturally competent and all that stuff.
yeah, I think there is a lot of parallels between being in law and therapy, just because it's a lot of listening to stories and kind of in a way persuading people, right? A lot of what you do as a therapist is you're convincing in not such a direct way on why someone should change or do something differently. So yeah, I wanted to be a judge or a lawyer my whole life, and then last minute I switched to being mental health when I went to grad school. And I actually recently discovered why I switched. And it's actually a little bit vulnerable, but I really think so. I grew up in an environment where my dad was very, very hard on me. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. But my dad's first generation from Bangladesh. So first generation parents sometimes can be a different beast. Uh, but yeah, I think I kind of doubted my ability to get through law school. And I felt like therapy was going to be a bit easier. So yeah. And I'm a therapist now.
Um, no, so that's so interesting. Why didn't you think you could be a lawyer?
I think I just had a lot of self-doubt. That's a big thing that I currently work with, and it's always an interesting thing to talk about with people, because I am well aware that I can come off very confident. And people are maybe they don't believe when I say that's the number one thing I work on. But yeah, just
I
building
bet
confidence.
yeah, it's imposter syndrome, right? I have it very bad, and people are always surprised about that too, because they're like, oh, well, you're confident and you can speak and you take, leadership roles at work and all of this stuff. And the reality is I don't think I can do any of it until I do it. So it's clearly something that is probably hard for people to see too, with all of these things that you do, right?
Mhm.
You're on TV, you're a model, you're
Mhm.
competing in different competitions and stuff. That takes a lot of courage and self confidence.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's interesting too, because I think something recently I've been trying to do more of is open up about it doesn't matter what you do or what you have or what you look like. And even the unfortunate story of Chesley Christ, I'm sure you've heard
Hmm.
that. Yeah. I feel like that unfortunate story opens up a lot of good conversations. And part of why I'm doing some of these events, like my event that I did last month, I did open up a little bit about my insecurities and my vulnerabilities. I did it on The
Wow.
Bachelor in front of the entire world. And I think it's a conversation we all need to have more, that
Yeah.
Everyone struggles.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's so hard with social media because, and we're getting better, but so many people just put up the highlight reel.
Mhm.
And, I remember I've told this 100 times before, but I was like, when everything was horrible was happening and my, divorce was public, I lost my job, I was really struggling mentally. And I took, I didn't want to do anything for New Year's. And I knew like every one of my peers from, reality TV were going to be at these glamorous events and stuff. And I just stayed home and then went to a dive bar with my friend. And I just went on Instagram and I was like, hey, you're going to see all of these glamorous photos from your friends, your family, influencers you follow and stuff. But that's the highlight reel. And
Right.
just so you know, like, I am not doing any of that. I'm sitting at home by myself at this time, and that's okay. And the outpour of people who reached out to say thank you for saying that, or I'm
Right.
sitting at home. So it's like Instagram, TikTok. There's so many highlight reels that it also, I think, creates inside people this feeling of inadequacy, and it's it's just a highlight reel.
Yeah.
We're all struggling in something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's good that you like explicitly shared it too, because I feel like on like a high level, we all understand we all struggle, but like none of us actually really talk about it. So like that's
Hmm.
even again like part of these events. I'm like, let's actually we don't have to like trauma dump on each other, but like let's actually talk about our struggles so people can hear it real time.
Right. What do you think? So you brought up trauma dumping. How would you define trauma dumping versus sharing? Because I feel
Yeah.
like people throw trauma dumping. It's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown out there now, and it doesn't really have meaning or means different things for different people.
Yeah, I think even take it a step further to define trauma, because I think that word is thrown around and is unfair
That's
to
a good
people who have
point.
actually experienced trauma. A trauma is literally your life being threatened physically or watching someone else's life be threatened physically. So we think of like a serious car wreck, war, being, raped or molested, which is not to minimize that we can still experience upsetting memories, which is very different.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, I just think trauma dumping would be like you're sharing too much of that too soon. There's nothing
Mm,
wrong with
okay.
like, I'm having a rough day with maybe a newer person, but it's not like, oh, my mom did all this and right.
I like that.
Yeah. Or like, because I think the issue with that, and I'm sure we'll get into it, I'll try not to go down a rabbit hole, but
Hey, rabbit holes welcome here. I love them.
sometimes we identify too much with our past, in my opinion, and that's what keeps us stuck. So it's like, oh, like this happened to me, and this is why I am this way, and this is so abnormal, and this is pathological, and like I just don't think that's the case. Um,
Well, I think especially what I've noticed is our peers in reality TV. Some of them say so stuck in something that happened or something that aired, and I just feel like it. I watch some of my peers, and I'm like, I feel for them because I'm like, you've got to get yourself out of this place where you're still talking about this and living in this every day. And with the work I've been doing, it's been hard sometimes for me because I have to like keep reliving it. But you've got to not get stuck on things that have happened to you or things that you've gone through if you're ever going to grow and move forward. And feeling stuck is the worst feeling in the world. I think that's like the worst feeling I've had is when I feel stuck.
yeah, yeah, it is not a good feeling, but there's always a way out too. So
Yeah, I think so too. So what do you say to I want to talk about the event real quickly
yeah,
before we go down any other rabbit holes. But tell me about your event coming up. It's going to be on the 28th of June. Is that right? 28th of June?
27th Thursday.
27th of June. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
27th of June, Charlotte.
Yeah,
Tell me about this event.
yeah, excited, but I'm also so nervous about this event. I think mental health in general is there's a stigma around it, um, and it's not the sexiest event to sell, especially a men's focused one.
Hmm.
But June is Men's Mental Health Month, so I wanted to bring awareness to it. I will have a panel of 4 men who I've hand selected that I'll ask questions to kind of just get conversations going. It is in person in Charlotte, but I do have a virtual option that is available that people can come to. And I really just want it's for men and women, but I want people to hear things that they need to hear. They need to be reminded that other people struggle in a similar way. I think when you hear what other people have gone through, you tap back into that vulnerability that we're told to like shy away from or to not have. And also just bring in-person connection. Even though I do have a virtual option, it is mainly the hopes of like face-to-face connection, because we don't get that
Yeah.
as much anymore.
No, we don't. I've been talking about that's come up organically in a lot of podcast episodes that I've been doing
Yeah.
lately. And I actually, my episode this week with Tabitha Little, that's her nickname. She has a Little Bit of Life podcast, and we were talking about how it like brings people together, but at
Mhm.
the same time, it kind of like gives you almost too much like connection and too many people that you can know. And there's like this fine line of we used to be in tribes, right, where you'd know 15 people for your whole life. And
Mhm.
now it's great because it brings people like we wouldn't have been able to do this 20 years ago, right? But at the same time, it's like we kind of replace things with virtual that maybe shouldn't be virtual, and people should come together. And when you're talking, about your mental health or some of these topics around that, it's not the same doing it over a camera. It's just not. Like there's body language that's missed out on. There's just human connection and like the oxytocin and all that stuff that happens when you're with a human.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I'm hoping that these can flourish into something much greater, and then it doesn't have to be like this idea of like a stuffy like conference room event that you have to have a mental health issue. It's like I was even talking to one of my friends yesterday, and he was like, "Hey, like a lot of men are not going to want to come because people are going to assume that there's something wrong with them if they go." And I think like that's the issue. Like if we're not doing these events, if you're not checking in on your mental, that's when the issues come up.
Um,
Um, so yeah, I have
and I know when I was I shared a little bit before we started recording. When I was younger, like I felt like there was something wrong with me. I
mm,
really did. And I have depressive feelings from like being 5 and 6 years old that I remember, and
yeah,
it was just like I felt like something was wrong with me
yeah,
for so long, like into my 20s. Like I'm 39 now, but like even probably up to like 30, 31, I just hid it because I thought there was something wrong with me. So that's a real thing. People do feel like there's something wrong with them. And
right,
as men, we're told things like man up or,
right.
don't be a baby or whatever, or a girl, like, there's like sexism thrown in there and all of it. But it's hard because you're just kind of conditioned that way.
Right. But the reason we feel like quote unquote something is wrong is because no one we're not talking about it. Like if you really open up the conversation, you'll see that 9 times out of 10 the other person on the other side can relate to whatever you're saying in
Mm,
some form or fashion. And yeah, I think there has to be a level of accountability we have to hold ourselves to, because there came a point when I was planning this event where I said, Medina, you have to stop being concerned about how many people are going to show up, because I found myself feeling like I was trying to convince men why they need to be at this event. And at the end of the day, like we have to make sure that we're like holding ourselves accountable to putting ourselves in that space too. Because yeah, I don't think there's a ton of spaces for men to do this, but I think now more than ever there is. But like I need them to meet me halfway. Um,
right.
so
Well, it's not just that's therapy in general. Like you got to
yeah,
do like 90% of the work outside of the session, and or I'm making that number up, but it is. You got to take the responsibility of wanting to do it. But it's scary because what's interesting is like millennials and of course Gen Z too, but like I think really millennial men, like our fathers were not talking about any of this. I
mm-hmm.
know like I look at my family and I get nervous talking about this because one of my dad's coworkers taught him how to listen to this podcast.
Ah,
So every now and then I get a little commentary from dad on it. But the shortness and the anger, and that's the acceptable emotion for a man, and like my father's generation is like anger. Like that's the acceptable form of emotion to be a man. Like
yeah. I don't know. I hear all of that, and I'm not a man, so I can't speak to this, but I also think like from being a therapist and just also my personal experience, I feel like as humans, we unconsciously seek out situations, people, environments that confirm how we see the world. So like If I
Yes.
feel like anger is acceptable, or I feel like no one's going to hold space, or people are going to use information against me, I'm not going to I'm not going to emote. I'm not going to express myself. And then when I do finally emote or express myself, which then oftentimes comes out as anger, it's actually usually not received well. And then the man or the woman comes back and says, "See, this is why I don't ever show emotion, because it's never received well."
Mm.
And it's like, but yeah, this wasn't an effective way to do that. And so that's why you oftentimes too, you'll see men or women who are emotionally closed off. It's what we call flat affect. They'll be like this, like no, not a ton of range of emotion, because you cannot selectively numb. So someone who's trying to numb one emotion is a numbing all of them. And then when it comes out as anger, it's not received well. And then it confirms that belief you have about the world, that it's unsafe to open up. Right. And so I think
That's
like,
so that that's so true. I didn't even
yeah,
think
and
about that. That's so
it's
true.
hard because I'm like I'm trying to hear what men are saying. I really am, and I think for me as a therapist, as a friend, as a family member, I'm a very like my friends would describe me as someone who likes to hold people accountable, and I hold my
Hmm.
clients accountable. Like, yes, this is hard, and like the way you're living is hard, right? Like, is it hard to open up? Yes. Will people use it against you? Yes. But the alternative is you're closed off, you're isolated, you're angry, you wind up lashing out. 98% of mass shootings are committed by men.
Hmm.
Number one killer of men under 50 is suicide. And that's
Yep.
because you guys aren't talking about it. And I promise you, there are spaces and places and people that will allow you to have that if you're willing to also, again, meet us halfway and open up, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you have to be like crying or like, oh my god, like it doesn't have to be like that quote unquote dramatic either. um it's just, I don't know, we're interesting creatures. We want to avoid feeling uncomfortable, but it doesn't work. And it's a false, we do things as a false sense of security that don't actually save
Yes.
us from anything.
No, it's like kicking the can down the road. You're prolonging the inevitable and then probably making it
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah, actually, like I think so. Even like the type of therapy I do is very behavioral,
Hmm.
because typically people come to me, if you break it down, they come to me because they've been trying to avoid an uncomfortable emotion. And in midst of doing that, they've actually made it worse. And so, what I teach people is that stop trying to control your emotions and your thoughts, change your behavior, and the other two typically follow suit. But that doesn't mean you still don't struggle or that you
Hmm.
don't feel uncomfortable. Like, think of it this way. I hear this all the time. A man's like, I don't want to open up because it's going to be used against me. Like, I don't want to get hurt is really what he's saying. Right?
Right.
And
Jeez.
so open up. Does that mean you won't get hurt or you won't get it used against you? Absolutely not. I can't confirm that that will or won't happen, but you can at least get potential ability to connect and love and experience those emotions, right?
Right.
So at least you're getting,
The opportunity.
like, I don't know, I just I get like real fired up about this stuff because it just it we create ourselves more suffering by trying not to suffer.
Yeah. Gosh, I couldn't have said that better myself. Now you sound like the way my therapist has been talking to me the last few months.
Good therapist.
Uh, yeah, it's like it's you know my I have several toxic traits, but one of them is that I one of them is that like I will withdraw if I'm struggling. I will just withdraw and handle it myself because that's how I'm conditioned to do it. And then the other one is that I will just get myself more and more stuff to do so that I don't have to sit with like really heavy emotions. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of like, and I recognize those and I try to do better. But I think what happens, because this used to happen to me, what happens is like I wouldn't share it. I would then deal with it on my own, which is basically like numbing it until it just doesn't feel any. It's like you get your arm accidentally chopped off, you just burn it, right? Instead of trying to get your hand reattached. Like that's kind of like how I would describe how I would handle loss or grief or depression or whatever. And so I think what a lot of times happens then is you have this like just repressed inside you, and then
Yep.
something triggers you, right? Which is what happens, and then it just explodes. Whereas before, if you would have just let it come out in an organic way, it would have been better for you. It would have been better for the people that you're later exploding all over. And I just don't think people recognize that when you repress something or you ignore something, it's like the water coming out of a hole. You plug the hole, another one opens,
Yeah.
and that one might be bigger. And that's kind of what's happening, especially I think with men, because we don't have a lot of space to do it. And how often can a man go up to his buddy and say, "Hey, man, I've been really struggling. I'm feeling depressed, or I'm feeling anxious about this." I mean, that is just not really in our like culture.
Yeah. But again, like I think like I hear that and I also hear that from so many different men individually. So I know that there are men you can't, but you have, and I think one of the most beautiful things as humans we can develop is the art of finding balance.
Mm,
Go cry in the locker room? No. Mm-mm. You're at work, you're in a meeting, you want to talk about how you're sad? Absolutely not. Bad idea, right? You come home and you have a good relationship with your partner or your lady and she's asking you genuinely how your day was, perfect moment, right? You go
hmm
to a group of friends that you have all kind of had this conversation with. um Again, a good moment, because I think at some point, like all of us, no matter what, myself included, like anytime I'm in a situation where I feel a certain way, I have to ask myself, how am I perpetuating this cycle, right?
mm,
How, what am I contributing to this? And I've talked about this in my last couple podcasts that I've done, is like, I don't like the saying, if someone's page makes me feel bad, I unfollow them. Like, no, if someone's page or Instagram or social media makes me feel bad, I have to understand, what is it provoking within me,
yes,
right? I think there's a difference between unfollowing someone who just has different interests in you than you, versus like I'm unfollowing them because I'm trying to avoid something that feels uncomfortable. And I think now more than ever, unfortunately, we have a hard time looking inward because it's scary. But again, like even like your phrase of like, oh, anger is acceptable. I don't feel like I hear what you're saying, but
no, I'm not saying it is.
yeah,
I
yeah.
should have
But
rephrased that. I'm not saying.
you
Go
know,
ahead.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to play like semantics, but like, yeah, like I get like that's the unconscious belief, and I get why you guys think that, right? Because it is.
I don't think that. I
It's
think like
a
I
lot of
think yeah, and I used this example on a recording the other day. Like Tom Brady gets celebrated when he goes and he smashes his helmet
right.
against. Do you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
like, but that, and then you have a player that would cry when they lost a Super Bowl or something, and that wouldn't be as accepted. They would be meme. There's memes about both, but
yeah,
right. And so
yeah,
like that kind of thing where there's just elements of it where, and now if you were to look at a woman's sport, it would be total opposite. I think the perception would be. And so what I mean by that is I don't think it's acceptable. Like I've made the active decision to like check inside before I react to something with anger. And
yeah,
so, but I think like with like people in my parents' generation, like the only time that men would be able to express themselves emotionally was anger. And so that's the kind of thing I think millennials and men hopefully are trying to break, that kind of cycle. Because I look, my grandpa was the same way. I'm
yeah,
sure his dad was the same way. And, like my grandpa's a war veteran. So who knows, the role that played in all of that stuff. So that's kind of what I meant. I don't think it's okay. I just think
yeah.
they kind of might think it's okay.
Yeah. Maybe I worded it bad too, but I think like I'm not. I'm also not a man, right? So I can't speak on that experience. But I think, you know, again, I feel like I just want so badly for men to see there are spaces and places, but again, like that's only half of the puzzle piece, right?
Yeah,
And I think finding the art of like when to turn certain things on and off. Like I think of even for myself, like even in dating, like I think a lot of men have been quote unquote turned off because they assume that I'm only masculine because I'm successful in my career and I'm very like I
I
like
hate
sports.
that.
I know it gets me going, and that'll be a side tangent, but it's like no, like I get like that filled in that area, but I'm not going to be that way in every, like I didn't get to be a director at a company managing 300 therapists using my feminine traits, right? I got those using my masculine traits, right? I got that using those traits. And men and women both need masculine and feminine. And
Totally. I actually don't like using masculine and feminine. I think that they're just it's like they're just traits.
yeah, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
who's to
yeah,
say one's masculine and one's feminine?
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like I just the way we use words is very, it's so up to interpretation in a lot of ways, which is even the trauma conversation we had, right? A few minutes
Yeah.
ago. It's like when someone's using trauma in one way and someone's using trauma in like the defined way or the clinically defined way like you are, you could end up having two totally different conversations. So anyway, the masculine feminine thing, I'm just like, it's just like a label and I just hate it. But that doesn't matter. But I know what you mean. I mean, I know what you mean by it, and that's what's important.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Good energies off each other though. Like if
yeah.
you know, it'll vibe off. Like I'm like, I'm sorry, like you asked me where we're going on our first date and you're mad that I'm acting masculine. Like someone had to put the pants on, right?
Oh my gosh. And you
Like,
know,
God dang it.
I totally agree with that. And you know what's funny? I think about, so I joke, but it's actually so true. I'm like, I'm thinking about starting to date. And I have no interest in dating apps. I have no interest in, I have talked to a couple matchmakers, and that's also very overwhelming. And, you know, one of the reasons is because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but like one of the big reasons that I struggle with it in its current state is one, I don't think people give people time. Like you don't, and someone would have you set the place that we're going to have dinner at for a date, take that as masculine, and then not go on the date and ghost you
Mm,
because people aren't, they're not taking the time to get to know one another and see if there's like a genuine connection. It's all
mm,
these superficial, or he said the wrong thing, or my dry satire sarcasm gets misinterpreted all the time if you don't know me. And
yeah.
so like I've had that, especially when I was younger and I didn't have as much control as I do now over my emotions, or I would just be kind of like an asshole about it. But you know that kind of thing when you're dating, you know, for me, for example, I'll be like, do you have a preference food type or a preference of what you, or anything you don't want to do? Because I do like planning dates. Even when I'm with someone, like I enjoy that. But you know, it is like a weird thing where people are almost afraid to say something, and then if someone does put the pants on, that becomes an issue. And it's like, well, if everything about this date or this communication is becoming an issue or a potential issue, kind of puts people in this like freeze mode and closed off mode, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard because yeah, like you said, everyone's different and you have to take the time to understand what you're working with.
And
I
if you
just
want to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I'm very much so in this like mindset of I don't know. Like I
No,
feel
say it.
I just feel like we're too lackadaisical with things, like in my opinion. Like
Hmm.
I'm very much so at this point where like I want to find my person. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people are not ready for that. And like that's okay. And I think
100%.
sniff that out from like and men will tell you their intention if you ask them and
Hmm.
they won't directly be like oh I have no intention of like maybe making this serious or but there's like a subliminal way that they'll say that which is fine. I think something I've learned as I've gotten older is I believe who the person is when they first approach me because I think a lot of times we are trying to change ourselves or another person and I don't think people change and I think in the
Yeah,
line of work that I do I feel like that's a pretty credible thing like it's a pretty credible source to say and I don't say it in a pessimistic way I even teach my clients so often it's like stop trying to make yourself this calm cool and collected person like you have a more anxious temperament and like that's okay anxious people
yeah,
are found to be slightly more intelligent and more creative and there's some like very frustrating aspects to being that temperament too but they are who they are right there's like a volume we can like adjust a
totally.
little and some communication and some give and take but like I think part of what I try to remind myself, because dating has been so hard for me, but it's like what I tolerate now is so different than what I would tolerate before. And I'm not trying to change who I am or change another person. Like sometimes I like before I'm like, was that too much? I'm like a very high energy. I like get
Yeah.
excited over small things and I don't want to ever water that down. And if it's like aggressive or too much or too assertive or too masculine, then like I'm not for you. So
Well, can I just, I have a couple things 'cause I want to ask you a few questions on that, but you're not too masculine. So whatever, yeah, like whatever that is, like if someone's gonna think that, even you, like
yeah.
that's not, you are who you are, right? And I think, even when I went into Love is Blind, my whole thing was like, I have figured out who I am. I have dialed up the things that I like and dialed down the things that I don't like. And I love that analogy because I do feel like I found peace when I accepted the things about myself that I
Mhm.
hated about myself, right? Or I struggled with for myself. So I actually love that. Dial up the stuff that's good and the good things about the parts you don't like about you and dial down things that you can actually control, right? But
Yeah.
what I don't like, I don't want you to think you're too masculine. I mean, I don't know you very well, but
Yeah.
there's someone out there that you'll be just the right amount of masculine for, and that's the hope. So I hope it's not something you beat yourself up on. But oh, go ahead.
Thank you. No, I was just gonna say I appreciate you saying that. I think it's always a little confusing too because I think when you think of yourself or another person, whatever you find maybe challenging or frustrating about them is also inadvertently their strength or what you enjoy about
Yeah.
them. So like I think I've definitely gotten better and probably have some work, but it's like you want me to be so many men's. I want a woman who's self-sufficient, doesn't need me, has her own stuff going on, right? Got that through my independence and my quote unquote masculinity, right? So
Hmm.
you want me to have all those things, but then also don't have those things when like I don't. And I'm not saying this is like women probably do the same thing to men, right? But it's just been interesting because I'm like, if you want that piece of me, you also have to get this piece of me too.
Right. Well, you
So
know what I've always said? You have to love that piece. And I had this relationship and it totally changed my perspective on this stuff. I had and she did stuff that would have annoyed the fuck out of me if other people that I had dated had done it. And
yeah.
then with her, I found it cute.
Aw.
And that was with my ex-wife too. Like there were things that she did that would have driven me nuts if it was most people. But when
Yeah.
she did it, I was just like, she's just being,
Aw.
it's like that kind of thing. And so I think like you have to love someone not in spite of their faults, but because of their faults, because that's the nuance of what makes them human. And
That's
that's the,
great.
yeah. So even if I tell myself, and this has been, I'm an activist. I have some very strong political things that I do that I work on. I work on campaigns, stuff like that. Like that's where I get a lot of my energy because I want to help other people. And
Mhm.
I find so much of my inner peace from helping other people. And so, and it has a lot to do with the way I grew up or whatever. But what I find is that there's a lot of people that don't like that. Not that they don't like that about me, but they don't love that about me, and it becomes difficult for them, or they take it personally when it's like when it's actually just a general idea or something that I'm generally passionate about. And so I've realized lately, I'm like, I need someone that is like, do your thing, Nick. I've got your back, and
Mhm.
I trust you, and all of that stuff. And that's why, like, I know the three things I need in a relationship, which is one of the questions I was going to ask you. I know that I need trust, like real trust, not just you're not going to cheat on me, that goes without saying kind of thing, but like
Yeah.
real trust that like I'm that you trust me that I'm going to do the right thing, that I'm going
Mhm.
to, be honorable and all of that stuff. And then stability, because I need a relationship that's going to be there and not be chaotic. And
Yeah.
then quality time, because that's my love language. Like I want to spend quality time doing things with just that person. And so that being said, what is hard for you about dating? And what are the things that you know you need in a partner?
I think dating can be hard for me because, whoo, that's a big one.
I was like, I didn't see this coming, but when you were talking about that and that came out, I was like, I got to dig into that.
Um, I think again, kind of what I touched on earlier. I think right now I'm at this point where like I am starting to learn my worth and the things that I'm able to bring to the table, and I won't tolerate certain things like
Mm,
and it'll lead right into the three things that I need. So I think that's a big piece of it. And I think I've been trying really hard to hold myself accountable that I'm not overshooting and not tolerating anything because I think sometimes we can do that as humans. And
that's
that's that accountability piece that I hold other people and myself to is like, hey, Medina, like, are you being like a little too harsh on the communication or like the lack of planning or whatever?
mm,
But then also trusting my intuition that like, hey, like, no, that's like a bare minimum basic need. Um, so I think that's partially what's been challenging about it. And my needs. I definitely need a good communicator.
Mhm.
And when I say communication, to be clear, I want clear communication of like, oh, like you want to go on a date, but like don't say like we should do something sometime, right? Or even like let's do something this week. Even with my girlfriends, it's like, hey, Friday 6 p.m. Are you free? Great, let's grab dinner, right? We'll pick a spot. To me, it shows a level of intentionality. I'm also an overthinker, and this goes back to part of what it will frustrate you about me is part of why you like me. Part of why I'm a very
Mhm.
good therapist is I know how to read between the lines. People who are anxious or overthinkers also tend to be extremely caring people. I'm going to
Yeah.
remember the candy bar you told me you liked from 3 years ago, and I'm going to leave it outside your door, right? So, like,
Oh, I am
I,
too.
yeah. So I just feel like I've also been learning to love that about myself because it's part of who I am. And are there times when I can tone it down and again hold myself accountable? Maybe I'm thinking too much about that. But I also need, like, I saw this quote and I like love it so much. It says, "Moral of the story is an overthinker needs to date a good communicator." Um,
That's so true.
it is, and it's like it's not like a. I think sometimes men or other people might think communication means you have to over communicate. No, it just has to be direct. Like
Yeah.
I was even just talking to someone about this. It's like just communicate to me that you can't communicate this week, really. And that in itself is communication and takes
Yeah.
2 seconds, right? Communicate to me that it's hard for you to communicate, right? The
Give
transparency.
you something to work with.
Yeah. So communication is number one. Physical touch is my love language. I love touch. I feel so loved, when I have that physical touch. Um, and emotional, like vulnerability. Like, and this is
Mhm.
also like, and maybe again, maybe I'm in La La Land and I'm naive or something, and
These
they're
are pretty standard things, I think, that you're saying.
oh,
Like,
they're really hard to find. They're really hard to find. But like there's nothing more attractive to me than a man who can admit that he's like struggling. And I know,
mm,
and again, there is a balance. Am I saying I want my man telling me he's struggling every day? No, right? But like if I've been dating you for 2 years and I've never seen you get emotional, that's a red flag to me. Like I don't want that. If you come home and you told me this whole day and it was so stressful and I say, "Oh my god, babe, I'm sorry. Like that sounds so stressful." And you're like, "I'm not stressed." Well, this
yeah.
signals to me so
So
many
I
things.
believe, yeah, I,
You're not in tune with your emotions, right? So if you don't know how to emote stress, you're not going to know how to emote proper love to me because you can't selectively numb emotions, right?
mm,
And I'm not trying to sound pervy here, but I'm just going to say this. Any man I've dated that's emotionally closed off is also not good in bed. And I'm and I'm
no,
and I'm,
I believe that.
I'm not trying to sound like weird when I say this, but it clicked for me probably like a year and a half ago. I'm like, it's because they don't know how to emote intimacy and passion and connection because they've numbed sadness and grief. So they've numbed everything, right? So that's the first red flag it gives me. And the second is if I'm stressed and I had a stressful day and I come home and I tell you these things, well, I'm not going to want to tell you these things now because you don't think it's stressful. You don't think it's warranted to have that emotion. At least that's the signal I get, right? I want to be
Well,
able,
that's a good point. That's a
like,
really good point.
that's how you connect. That's why people develop crushes on their therapist all the time because you are telling them things that are bringing you connected. The
And you're getting validated, and you're so that makes sense because then if you're coming home and you had a stressful day at work and your partner doesn't experience stress at work, which is bullshit, but then you're like, well, stress at work isn't something that he understands or really matters to him or is a real thing. That's actually a really good point. I've never thought of it like that. But if
yeah,
you can't, yeah, the men in bed thing, I buy that. I believe that because then you
like
can't even talk about it.
yeah, like I can't even tell you like having like like the vulnerable conversation of like what do you like, what don't you like the men that I've dated that have emotionally closed off, we never had those conversations, right? And like
Wow.
I don't know. I had a deep conversation with my friend the other day though, because again, I'll hold myself accountable too. She's like, "Do you think you like unconsciously date emotionally closed off men because you're a little emotionally closed off?" And I was like, and you're just picking someone who's even more emotionally closed off. So it's kind of like you don't even notice, you know?
Would you
Uh,
describe yourself as emotionally closed off, though?
Honestly, yeah. I think
Okay.
because, and this is something I'm going to be working on the next couple of weeks because I'm taking my first ever, aside from filming, this is my first 3 weeks off ever as a therapist. I've never taken more than a week off from
Oh,
therapy.
wow.
Um, And in all transparency, like I've actually been struggling like quite a bit just because I feel like my job is like very unique in the sense of like I really do have to turn off my emotions. Like if I have to cry or if I'm upset, I have to like hop in
Mm,
and not only be like okay looking, but I have to be like that solid base for that person. And like it can wear on you like
I
really,
bet.
really bad. So at the end of the day, it's like hard to want to like touch base with your own emotions. And I grew up with my dad being very like nothing's ever good enough. Like my one of my core
Mm,
memories is like coming home as a little kid with a 98 and being so excited and my dad being like where's the other 2 points, which really I think and I try not to minimize it because my friend I was like it sounds so silly, she's like it's not silly, like it's a
yeah.
very monumental like setting the precedence of what
Perfectionism. You're
yeah,
expected to be perfect,
yeah, so I
not
think
just good enough.
yeah, totally. Like, and even I have like I think a tendency to like seek out men who like are unimpressed. Like, I think I'm someone who I'm gonna like try to give myself some accolades. Like, I would say I'm a pretty impressive woman, and like I think I unconsciously seek out men who are like unimpressed by like what I can bring to the table because it matches what I believe about the world. Kind of like
Your
what I was telling.
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
yeah, like oh, like if I did an event, they probably wouldn't wind up coming. Like, like not much.
Which is, by the way, how you were talking about your event before we started recording today.
What was I
Like
doing?
you were saying like, oh, I don't know if I can get 50 men or whatever
Oh,
it was. Like you
yeah, Tommy.
your negative self speak. It's
I actually came here for therapy, you guys.
But I think so. You know what I think is hard too with dating, and again, I'm like several years removed from it at this point. But what I think is so hard about dating now is everyone has these like unrealistic expectations of what a relationship is supposed to be like. And I think
Mhm.
social media contributes to it. I actually think reality TV contributes to it. And I think that, one of the things Dr. Isabel Morley says, who's on my foundation, she's a psychologist, is that what reality TV does is it actually shows like bad behaviors and normalizes like toxic behaviors, whether they're real or not, whatever, you can get into that. But I think it's like that in social media and the idea that everything has to be this fairy tale. And I actually used to think this when I was younger about like movies, like
Mhm.
rom-coms, right? Because I watched a lot of rom-coms in high school with my high school girlfriend. It
Oh,
was you see a horror movie for me and I'll see a rom-com for you kind of exchange. And so I saw, and I just felt it kind of like created unrealistic expectations of like grand romances and relationships, and that the problems you're actually having aren't really that like real. They're like one big problem you have to overcome in a rom-com to work out. And I think that's kind of escalated with social media where people just want this social media friendly relationship or this grand love story on The Bachelor or Love is Blind or whatever, and it just kind of gives people sort of this unrealistic expectation of what a relationship is because they're
mhm.
hard work. They're really hard work. On their best days, they still take work.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I know that some people try to use this word probably in a different way than I'm interpreting it, but I hate the idea of organic. I think like chemistry, like if you're physically attracted to someone is organic. But the actual act of building a relationship, because when I hear that, I hear, oh, like I don't want to plan when our date is, or like no, we're two grown ass adults. We're gonna have to plan, and there's nothing organic about us making like setting aside intentional time to spend quality time with each other.
Mm, yeah.
Um, yeah, because I agree, and yeah, like I don't know, and even like I'll transparently say this, like even after I got off the show, like how many people are like offering me free like Botox and filler and all this stuff. And it's like, I don't judge anyone who does it. I don't personally do it, but it's like, then I'm like, sometimes I do get self conscious. I'm like, I'm seeing these women on social media and it's like, these are the girls that are kind of like booed up. It's like these like beautiful, like
Oh, I
everything.
know. It's
So there's a lot of like comparison that can go on and, what we think a relationship looks like in Santorini on France. Like, I'm
yeah.
like, when are these people working? I'm like,
Serious. Well, I think there's also I wonder that too all the time. I'm like, where is this person funding whatever it is? These trips,
I know.
these glamorous gowns, and these intense like, oh, check out this thing I bought. It's only like $50,000. It's like who's Like, who's doing that? Like, who's getting this stuff? It's totally crazy. I really think excuse me, social media has set such unrealistic expectations on so many things. And then I'm like, how are you dating? Like, where do you find men that you want to date?
Well, I'll let you know when and if I find that.
Yes, please
Oh,
do let me know.
I was on Hinge for a little, but I paused that because I was just getting so tired from that.
It's
Um,
exhausting. I
it's
was
so
exhausting years ago. Like, it's fake. It's my therapist keeps telling me to get on dating apps, and I'm like, it's no, not now. There's an elephant in the room, and if I call it out and say, yes, that was me on, this show, or I don't, like, both are terrible experiences, right? Because, like, if I call it out, it sounds like I'm bragging, which is definitely not what I'm doing. And if I don't, then it seems like I'm hiding it, right?
no.
So you don't think so?
I think you're scared to go back on them, but like either way, it doesn't. You don't know what's going to happen.
Well, yes, that is true. And then I tell myself this, do I see myself at the end of my day sitting on Hinge, scrolling, liking, responding to very surface level conversations? That sounds like a horrible way to spend my evenings.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's yeah. I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, mine's paused for a reason. So
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Well, you only have like 5 minutes, right? Is that? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
Okay, okay. No, no, no. That's okay. I chatted your ear off at the beginning. I was excited to talk to you. So one last thing, and then I'm gonna hopefully keep this quick, and then give you a chance to ask me anything, which is how I like to end the shows. But what what would you say if there was one thing that you could do in your work that you would want to do to like change the world? Or maybe it's around men's mental health. I know we've been talking a lot about that. Like, what's that one thing that you would do or you think that we should be thinking about in changing?
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason I've been trying to like break the public speaking space is because every day I feel like I'm saying the same message to one person at a
Individual. Yep.
and I'd rather to a bigger group of people because I really, my mission is to reframe what therapy should look like. I think it's a disservice that we are thinking that therapy is you're going and you're talking about the same thing every session or the issue of the week. You don't have structure to the session. It's not evidence based, right?
Mm,
Insurance companies are getting smarter and they're asking for therapists and social workers to now provide evidence that their therapy is working. I think therapy should be a lot less talking and a lot more doing. There should be a level of like, empathy, validation, and then there should be a kind of a nitty gritty piece to it where it's like, let's get up and do this, even though you don't feel like doing it. So I would just love to be able to like break that and get people better. Like, I can't tell you. And the whole reason I started this was because the amount of people that would come to me and say, I wish I knew this 10, 20, 30 years.
hmm
You taught me more in the last 2 weeks than I've learned in the last 25 years of therapy. Um, and therapy should not be long term. That is my, you should not be seeing your therapist for unless you're doing it on a very like maintenance level. Like, okay, you're going like once every like month or two, and it's just, you're not really like necessarily looking to change anything super dramatic or drastic. Like, you're just really going as an upkeep type of thing. But if you're symptomatic and you have struggles in your life, like there should be a titration off and you should go flying home.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. I've been seeing mine for longer than that, but it ebbs and flows. So it's like there's maintenance mode where it's like once a month, once every 2 months, and then there's reality TV time where it's like once a week, and it just changes, right? But there's different things that kind of come up. But she actually told me to evaluate maybe a year. No, it was a little longer, maybe 2 years ago, where she was like, take some time and really think about, like, have we gone as far as we can go, kind of thing. But
yeah,
that was true because the reality TV thing, like, I always tell them, like, you're the expert because you helped me get to a good place before, you supported, helped me during, and then you helped me after. And so,
yeah,
like, go write a book about that or something. But yeah, so I think you're, there is something there that I agree with, where if you're just going and it's this routine, you're talking about the same stuff over and over, and nothing's changing or nothing's getting better, your symptoms aren't improving, your behaviors aren't improving, you're not dialing up the good stuff and dialing up the bad stuff, what are you doing? Like, you're just not probably a right fit for each other.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying that because because I've made some reels on this and people get real upset when I'm like, there should be less talking and more doing. And people are like, where are you getting such bold claims? I'm like, actually, this. So the number one way to treat anxiety related disorders is to behaviorally have someone do it. It's not to talk about why they're not doing it. It's not to figure out why they're like literally in session. You're scared of driving. We're driving in session. You're scared of the elevator. We're going in the elevator. Right. But like
that's why I was saying like 90% of it is done outside of therapy. Yeah.
Or if you have a good therapist, you're doing it because it's like a trainer. You wouldn't go to, I use this analogy all the time, but you would never go to a trainer and talk about why you're not working out or talk about the workouts you're going to do. You would literally do it. And then you would go home and you would practice again. And that's why working out is so effective. But sorry, the reason I said all that was because the way that you're describing it, I don't want people to get confused where I'm like, don't be in therapy. And if you are, then like you're effed. It's like, what we call is like skill acquisition. So I do test measures with my clients. 9 times out of 10, what I see in the first month is this. And then I see this, which is what we call skill mastery. And then sometimes there's a hit, like you go back reality TV stuff, right? And then you re-up therapy. And then you come back down and but this whole, like I go to my therapist weekly for years, or like there's not a structure to the session. Like I want to get that out of like, that's my mission, because people waste too much time and energy on that, and it keeps people stuck.
I actually agree with you 100% on that. I completely agree with you on that. I feel like I could talk to you forever, but
sorry.
but no, I love your work. I love what you're doing, and I'm very grateful too for the men's mental health stuff. But I'll be super quick. But before we go, I like to ask my audience. My audience likes when I ask people to ask me a question. So go for it. What do you got?
No pressure. No, I would. So I know you started this podcast, but like, is there like a long-term goal with the podcast, or like, yeah?
Yeah, it's so when I started this podcast, it was really something that I did for me, because I feel like there's not enough conversations about the important stuff going on in the world, and everything becomes very surfacey, or what I've now dubbed as like low-level content, which is a lot of what you get on podcasts that are just gossiping or commenting on commentators commenting on something else, and it's just this like very like people talking about other people instead of talking about the things going on in the world that are important. And so that's why I started the podcast, because I like to have meaningful conversations and break stigmas and talk about things that I think are important and stream of mind and thought for me at that time. Now, my long-term goal is that I would love to grow my like YouTube channel and my podcasting network like into a network with different shows focused on different topics, bring different people in. So I've got like a YouTube exclusive show that I do weekly with a friend of mine. I've got possibly another show that I'm doing. So I just kind of want to grow like high level quality content and get, more and more of these important discussions going. So it's not just, confined to a handful of people that are willing to have those conversations. So that's kind of like my long-term goal there. But the interesting thing is like my long-term goal has never been to do it full time. So I think if that becomes possible, that would be super cool. But my mission is really to help people go through life with their eyes wide open, because a lot of the stuff we've talked about here and a lot of the things that I think people just don't know about, or just don't talk about, or just don't have an understanding of. And we can use, our platforms that we have, that we were, essentially gifted for little to no money, and do something good with it.
Yeah, I agree. Break the stigmas.
Exactly. So I want to thank you again for coming on here. Can you do me a favor and tell everyone where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, my Instagram handle is Dina Lene, which I'm sure you'll link.
All linked in the bottom.
Yeah, so yeah, give me a follow. There's a bunch of other stuff on there you can click beyond that. So, but yeah, thanks for having me. I had fun.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. And the event link's below too for anyone who wants to check out the event. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.